Good morning, Ades. Am I audible to all of you? Is my voice reaching out to you guys? I want you to confirm. Yeah, खुश रहिए रोशन. Good morning everyone. So I think I'm audible to all of you, right? Okay, fine. So I am, let me introduce a little bit about myself and then we'll start with our lectures on international relation. I am Manoj Pathak and I'll be taking care of your international relations. And if I talk about myself, I have and my experience about UPSC and teaching with this. Yeah, you have seen me teaching geography. Yes, I teach geography as well. So, like Devam has already mentioned that I teach geography as well. So, with my experience, I'll first like to share my experience with you. I have given 3 interviews of UPSC as a student. I have given as many 3 interviews of Uttar Pradesh Public Service Commission and 2 interviews of Bihar Public Service Commission as well. And my optional was geography, so definitely I do teach geography as well. I teach environment and ecology and of course international relations, because there is a chapter in geography which pertains to these subject matter as well. So this is my introduction. Now, without wasting much of time on myself, rather I like to talk about this international relations and its relevance. And of course, I'll be more than willing to take all the questions. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. So I'll be more than willing to take the questions as well. But as this is our first lecture of international relations, my focus would be to make sure that you understand this subject matter, its relevance, and in which stages it is important. As the word in itself is self-explanatory, international relations. So it deals with the relationship at the international level, beyond the boundaries of the countries. Of course, Ravi, it is relevant for CSC 2024 as well. This topic is has historical underpinnings. So definitely it will be important at each and every year. Whenever you decide to appear for the exam, it will remain important for that as well. Okay. So I was talking about this relationship, international relationship. This is basically a relationship beyond the boundaries of nations, where we are not confined only to our boundaries, where we breach the boundaries and reach out to other nations in order to make sure that we can fulfill the requirement of our boundaries, our nation, our requirements. Okay, it is clear to everyone. Now, I'll give a little glimpse about the relevance of international relationship in your examination. First, I'll talk about the prelims. This is the first stage of your examination. So, of course, this international relationship is important with respect to prelims. Kaise? As I have written approximately 10 questions in prelims. Today only, this class started today only. This is the first class, and 5 minutes back I started taking the lecture. So you are not missing anything. We'll be starting here only now. So I was talking about the prelims. So in prelims, you have UPSC has mentioned one statement, that is current affairs of international importance. So specifically, okay, Anis, will be coming to your question. I'll definitely talk about such psychological games, how the countries play, when I'll be tackling Indo-China relations, when we'll be tackling the neighborhood relationships. But first I want you to focus on the things which are important in the first lecture. That is your strategy, the importance of the subject matter. We'll stick to this for some time, and thereafter we'll switch to the subject matter. I'll definitely come to that part as well. You need not be worried. After 2-3 classes, we'll be talking about that only. So do not be in haste. I'm very sure you have read some of the things, and that is really good that you have read some subject matter. So it will help you to understand the things better. So I was talking about prelims. So in prelims, you have one statement, like I said, the current affairs of international importance. So international word is mentioned here. So international relations has been given importance in prelims as well. And if we look at the old question papers, definitely you'll find that at least approximately 10 questions are there. Some years it is more than 10, and some years it will be less than 10. The whole IR syllabus, 3 hour classes from today, Nana, and approximately 50 to 55 hours would be enough to complete each and everything. Hereafter, you'll need to look at the newspapers, the current events. You'll have to add, as it is a dynamic topic. Okay, so I'll be talking about those things. Let me first give a glimpse of what are the areas which will give you questions. Good morning, Mani. Good morning. Which will give you questions in prelims. So the first aspect from where the UPSC is making questions is Indian diplomacy with respect to countries. The Indian diplomacy with other countries are important topic with respect to international relations, and whenever some of our representatives, it can be our prime minister, it can be our president, or any of the ambassadors that India is sending to other countries, they meet with their counterparts, then there is always some policy decisions. There is always some policy decisions, and UPSC asks questions based on that. Subham, no, as far as my lectures are concerned, there will be less of writing, because mostly I'll be giving you everything in written format. I'll be focusing more on explaining the concept so that you can get the things well. And of course, some of the things need write-up, so we'll be doing it in the meanwhile as well. So you need not be worried about that. 95% of the things you'll be getting in written format, and that too like notes only, so that you don't have to remove anything from that, or you'll not be required to add anything unless and until it is in current affairs. Amit, with respect to book, maybe after covering the whole course, I can suggest if some of you are interested in further readings. But as far as my experience with teaching and appearing for the exams is concerned, I have made the notes so comprehensive that probably beyond current affairs, beyond Hindu, most probably, the newspaper or Indian Express, whatever you are following, you'll not be requiring anything else. And if some of you are interested in the book, then you can go for Tata McGraw-Hill book, 3rd edition, that is available in the market, of international relations. But I don't think you'll be requiring that, because I'll make sure that you understand each and everything. So the first topic that I talked about that will give you questions in prelims is diplomacy, that meets. So the other is the participation of India in international organizations. It is really, really important. The participation of India with international organizations not only leads to some of the policy decisions or policy framework that impacts the world, but it also is happening at some of the places which are relevant to that subject matter. Let's say if we talk about climate change, you must have seen that almost all the important places where these meets are happening are some of the places which have actually faced the brunt of climate change. They are the places who are most affected. Like you have seen many of the important conferences happened in South Asia, that is India is impacted, so there was a convention in India as well. So if these kind of things are happening, you need to make sure that you are looking at each and every aspect, that is the physical geography of the place where it is happening, some of the relationships with climate change, maybe if the thing is on climate change or any of the topic. Yeah, Ankit, to 2023, yeah. Most of the subject matter will be sufficient for 2023 as well. But as I said, it is a dynamic topic. Every day the relationship is changing. So when we are done with our lectures, from that day, you'll definitely be required to follow the relationship in newspapers. That will suffice for this subject matter. Rest of the things I'll be covering in the lecture. You need not be worried about that. Okay? So the third type, which is giving the most number of questions recently, is map-based questions in prelims. You must have seen, everybody speaks about that some of the places are there always and they don't identify the place. The reason being, some of our diplomats are visiting the place, maybe our ambassadors are visiting the place, and we fail to see those places. We do not identify those places, and so we find it difficult to mark those questions in exam. Many a times people think that we'll go through the current affairs of maybe environment or geography and we'll find those places. But the thing is, those places often appear in the news items which are related to foreign policy or international relations. So you'll be looking at those places as well. I'll be trying to cover most of the places which are important till date. But here, after the completion of the classes, definitely you'll be following that. I'll also be telling you how to mark those things so that you can remember that for a longer period of time while I'll be discussing those places. Okay. So for prelims, we have seen that there are almost 10 questions, and map-based questions, definitely if you'll open the question paper, you'll see as many as 10 to 15 questions based on maps. Out of those, half of them are always appearing because of some of the events related to international relations or foreign policy. I hope you are clear with this. Pradyumna, I belong to Uttar Pradesh. I am from Gazipur in Uttar Pradesh. Okay. So we'll be discussing about these things maybe later when we'll meet in person. Now I want you guys to focus on the subject matter. So here we are clear with the perspective of prelims. Now I'll be moving to mains and then to essays and interview. So mains, if you look at the questions, we'll look at some of the questions of previous year. Okay. So I'll be starting with 2020. Let's see what was the nature of the questions in 2020. Instead of giving you a broad list, I'll rather prefer to give you a glimpse through the questions so that you can understand. Great money, you belong to my place only then. Okay? We'll be looking at these questions. We'll definitely be looking at these questions in order to make sure that you understand the scope of whole of the syllabus. You understand that I'll be covering each and every aspect that has actually appeared in the exam hall and which will be appearing in the future. We'll be looking at each and every aspect. So if we look at 2020, we have 4 questions. 4 questions, approximately 50 marks. Okay. So we have 50 marks in this year, 2020. And the questions that were pertaining to IR were like global health security. Okay. We are talking about global health security. So when the term global is used, you have to identify that this question belongs to IR. And plus, it is talking about role of an organization. Right? WHO is an organization which is working in the field of health. So you have to make sure No, Mohit, it is not sufficient for PSI or optional. Definitely some part of it, you'll get the benefit out of it. For optional, the content will be maybe sufficient. The subject matter will be sufficient, but you won't be able to write good answers because you have to put some jargons of political science that I'll not be using. In GS, we do not use jargons that are important to optional subject. Optional is altogether a different language. We have to use a different language in optionals, but subject matter, yeah, you'll be using the same content in your optional in some of the chapters wherever it is relevant. So you can be assured about that. But writing skill, you'll have to build based on the things which you'll be taught by some subject teacher of optional. Okay. So role of WHO, I was talking about, and global. So in international relationship, you can understand that we'll be reading about organizations, the relationship of the organizations with the nation. Okay. We'll be looking at this relationship. Now the second question. If I talk about the second question, it talks about Indian diaspora has a decisive role. I'm not completely going into the question. I'm just trying to, multinational organizations, of course. Intergovernmental organizations, multinational organizations, we'll be looking at all of those. So Indian diaspora, these are the people who do not now reside in India, but were residing in India at some point in time. They belong, their genesis belongs to India. So they are also important to us. And so there is a question. So we have to cover this aspect as well. We'll be talking about the people who belong to the country and who have moved somewhere else and who are helping out us from being there only. We'll be talking about this aspect as well. Shivam, like I said, for optional, I cannot suggest because my optional was geography and we do have a chapter on political geography. So I feel comfortable while I teach international relations. And you'll have to ask someone else, or maybe I'll inquire and make sure that you are informed about it. Okay. So Indian diaspora. So we'll be talking about the people who moved outside. Maybe they moved outside before independence. Some of the people after independence, they still are moving out, residing there, but they do have a feeling of being Indian and they are contributing towards the progress of India. That you have actually seen in the last few days when the Biden government was not taking action. It is our diaspora, the Indian diaspora, which put forward this thing with all their might, and the US government succumbed to the pressure and they sent the necessary items, the medical items, to India. So we'll be discussing these aspects as well. Notes will look into. Notes आपको ये सारे मिल जाएंगे जो अभी मैं पढ़ा रहा हूँ. You'll get this. You'll definitely get everything on time. Every day you'll be receiving this thing. Don't be worried. Now, every now and then there is a groupings. We'll talking about the groupings as well. Some of the small groupings made by the nations who have common goals in the international politics. Okay, तो Quad is a group. इसके बारे में आपने पढ़ा भी होगा. You must have read about this thing. 4 countries coming together in order to make sure they get through some of the common minimum motives that they have in the international arena. So Quad, this was a question. And now the fourth question, what is the significance of Indo-US defense deals and Indo-Russian defense deals? So now if someone is looking at this question from the perspective which is contemporary, or from the perspective that is current, then he won't be able to answer this question very easily. The reason being कि ये पूछा ही क्यों गया है? Why this question has been asked? And it relates it with Indo-Pacific region as well, specifically. तो ये ऐसा question क्यों पूछा गया है? Why this question has been asked? Because there was a history of US and Russia being in a war that we called as Cold War. It was not an actually war, but it was a silent war. It was more about making nations come to one of those groupings. But India, being a non-aligned country, chose for many years not to align with any of these. So in this question, if you want to write a good answer, you'll have to make sure that you understand the Cold War, right? Kunal, you have rightly pointed. Naam, of course, non-aligned movement. You'll have to understand these all aspects in order to make a good argument in your answer. So we'll be looking at these aspects. So we have understood some of the aspects here. Now let's see some of the questions that has appeared in the past. So if we look at the flow of the questions, definitely you can understand after looking at this that each year we are having approximately 4 questions only or 5 questions only. But there was a time. Yeah, Devam, 400 issue between USA and Russia. We'll definitely be talking about all these aspects when we move to the relationship with a particular country and groupings. So if you look at these questions, you'll get these all questions as well at one place only. I'll send these to you so that it will be easy for you to have a look at these questions, and then you can follow the things whatever we'll be discussing. But if we look at some of the old question papers, 4, 5, right? These are the number of questions that we see now. But look, 2013 there were 7 questions. So definitely there can be again as many questions if there are more international events that are important to India. We'll be looking at each and everything from the perspective of India and some of the events with the perspective of world as well. But mostly we'll be focusing on why some event is important to India. Now 2012, see, there were 9 questions. And if you look at 2011, there were as many as 15 questions. So it is not about how many questions are coming now. It is always about how many international events are happening which can affect India. So, yeah, Asu, I'll be starting with the basics only. I'm just discussing now about the questions. You need not be worried. We'll be looking at the most basic points. जिसे कुछ भी नहीं आता है, those of you who have never heard of any of the terms will also understand this thing. Yeah, I'll be covering dynamic part as well, Tanu. You need not be worried. Dynamic linkages, I'll also be telling you which news items to follow for maybe 21 mains or 2022 mains. Some of the events, definitely, it is very, very easy to guess that which questions can appear in the exam. So you need not be worried. We'll be talking about the dimensions, each and every aspect. And I'll also be discussing how to write an answer. If you look at the notes, the way I have prepared them, they are basically a format, a writing format only, which you can replicate in the answers with little modifications of the contemporary things that I'll teach along with the subject matter. I'll also talking about some of the writing skills because I faced 3 interviews because of writings only. Subject matter, most of you will know the same things. Even if somebody is not taking the classes, he'll definitely understand by reading the book. But this skill, the skill of writing, cannot come until and unless you practice or you are made to understand this. Somebody like who have experience of writing mains and facing the interview, or maybe some of the people who have qualified, if you get through their answers, you'll have an idea. So I'll definitely make sure that you understand this aspect as well of writing. We'll move slowly and I'll make sure that you understand each and every aspect of answer writing. Okay? So need not worried about this. So I was talking about these many 15 questions in 2011. That was a year when there were so many things happening around the world which were impacting India. One of the causes was also that there was a perception worldwide that there can be a change in government. And you'll see when there was election in US, there was a temperament in India as well. People were talking about this thing. People who are residing in USA, those who are our relatives or friends, they are speaking about this thing. So definitely, such discourses and discussions in other countries lead to some of the summits, some of the meetings, some of the discussions, which can make many of the aspects important in that year. So you can have more number of questions. Yeah, Kunal will be talking about such things as well, Arab Spring and all, and its impact on India. Will be looking at those aspects, the small events as well. Will definitely be looking at. Now we are done with this mains part as well. The essay part. If we talk about essay, almost each and every essay has some aspect where you can talk about these relationships. Okay, so it is important for all the essays. But if you ask me, were there any questions where directly the question was based on international relation? Of course, you know, in 2020, there was direct question that was on technology with respect to international relations. This was an essay. So 125 marks, right? And rest the other essay, of course, you need some knowledge of international relation in order to write some of the important paragraphs in essays. We'll be talking about that as well. Kunal, for GS it will be sufficient, and like I said, PSIR, definitely it will help, but you'll have to use the jargons of optional. You'll have to use a language that pertains to that optional. Every optional has a specific way of writing. You'll have to learn that thing, and then you can use the same content with that language and you'll write beautiful answers. Okay, so for essay, definitely you need this thing. And interviews, if you have any of seniors or friends who have appeared for the interview, Mani, this year there was only one essay that was direct. If you look at old question papers, definitely there were questions on many of the things that are directly related to international relations. You can have a look at those questions. And if you want, I'll definitely add some of the topics in this PDF only, and I'll send it to you. Need not be worried about it. This year there was direct essay, one essay on international relations. Now I was talking about the interviews. If you know people who have faced the interview, they'll definitely tell you that almost 30% of the interview is dominated by the topics which are related to our diplomacy and international relations, because these things are always in news. These things are related to current affairs. So most of the time the panel tries to understand what your view is about the international relations, what you understand about these relationships. So definitely they'll be giving some of the questions on that as well. Okay, Adi, questions will ask only on India relations. No, it is not like this relationship can be in a different way as well. There can be a question where they'll be talking about, let's say, USA. Okay, if we talk about USA, North Korea, right? Few days back, North Korea has said that the consequences of some of the decisions taken by USA are going to be negative. They'll have to pay the price. So with such statements, they can ask what impact it can have on India or the world, right? So some of the times world, most of the times India. So this relationship is not always about being nation centric. We are a country which believes in international sentiments. We have always, starting from our first Prime Minister Nehru, we have always talked about a system where all the nations can coexist. Vasudev Kutumbakam, the whole world. We talk about such aspects. So definitely there can be a question. And yeah, Kunal, I'll be looking at some of those only, and only if they are important with respect to the questions related to GS. Okay, general studies, if that topic is important, I'll be covering. In optional papers, maybe you can have a question based on a topic which is specifically important for a particular nation, because it is a specialized subject, so it can focus on some nation state individually as well. But if we talk about GS, until and unless it has a big impact on our nation, that is India, or world as a whole, it won't appear in the question paper of GS. So we'll be focusing on those aspects only, which will take care of GS. Okay. So you are clear with this thing also. So IR is a topic that will fetch you good numbers in prelims. 20 marks is like almost 1/5 of the marks that is required to clear the prelims. And if we talk about mains, at an average 50 to 80 marks. Some of the years it were 150, but let's say it is 80 marks only. So 80 marks are good, and in interview definitely you are expected to be aware about the things whatever is happening around. So it will give you a chance to showcase your strength and score good marks in interview as well. Okay. Okay, streaming pause हो गई है. Am I audible now? Am I audible? Is there? Okay. Okay, thank you. All good. So now, as we have discussed about the relevance of the subject matter, from here, we'll be moving towards the real content. We'll be talking about some of the things which are relevant from the perspective of the exam, from the perspective of creating an understanding of international relations, of the world view of India. Okay, so now let's start with some of the important aspects. So here we have our definition of international relations. So it says that this relations is concerned with the relations across boundaries of nation states. Okay, streaming is pausing, but I am audible. So maybe let Himanshi, I think there is some problem with the app, or maybe with the internet, but I'm sure that things will be okay. If you can hear me, then definitely you are understanding the concepts. So focus at the things that I am discussing. If the problem persists for maybe 2, 3, or 5 minutes, then we'll definitely look at a solution. Okay? Yeah, Amit. So let's start with this. So as initially I had suggested, it looks at the relationship beyond our boundaries. Okay? So in international relations, many things come into picture. I have listed some of those so that you can have a glimpse of the things that are important. For example, it is concerned with international political events and economic events. It is also concerned with national and ethnic identities. It is talking about the international relationship is all about environment, diplomacy, media, social movements, security, terrorism, the analysis of the foreign policy of the different states, how they are behaving. I'm very sure you are done with your polity. Okay, is it not visible? Now it's okay? I guess now this must be clear to each one of you. So, it also pertains to the foreign policy of other states. Why? Why we are concerned about the foreign policy of other states? Because we live in a global world. This globalization has made sure that is international relations is only cropped, so don't be worried. I think now that's fine. You can see everything, I guess. Yeah, that is visible. Yeah, polity is done. So definitely you know the difference. Yeah, you must have read globalization and trade. This is important to international trade. My point was there is always a difference between the terms, the nation and state. When you use in international relations and polity, you have to be very, very clear while using such terms. These terms are important. हम हर जगह पे नेशन या स्टेट नहीं लिखते रहेंगे. कहां पे नेशन यूज करना है, कहां पे स्टेट यूज करना है, ये आपने पॉलिटी में सीखा होगा. आई एम वेरी श्योर. ओके, गवर्नेंस इज ऑल्सो डन. दैट इज ग्रेट. So you have to be very, very cautious while choosing such terms while writing the second paper. In fact, you must have heard from many people that most of the students fail to get good marks in second paper. Reason being, the only reason is that usually you don't choose the right words to give an impression in the notebook. Whenever you are writing an argument, you fail to use the right word. But this subject requires usage of right words. So we'll be talking about these aspects as well. So international relations is about everything. You can say that whatever comes to your mind, it has an implication on international relations. It has definitely an implication, like if you talk about COVID-19, let's take an example of the disease that is the pandemic that is killing so many people today in the world. Okay, clarity नहीं है दोनों में. I'll come to that, Pradyum. Nation और state, I'll definitely tell. मैं आपको बता देता हूँ पहले जो मैं बता रहा था. Let's say I was talking about COVID-19 pandemic. So when it started, you know that many of the people started calling names to China. They started calling that virus Wuhan virus, and China protested. China protested, and it made sure that nobody is using that name. The virus is not attached to China, the nation, because its image was on stake. It could have been written in the history that that country gave pain to most of the nations. Because of this impression only, you have seen that many of the countries shifted their manufacturing units out of China. So being a strong nation, being vocal about its requirements, it made sure that nobody is associating the virus with China or Wuhan. But let's have a look at our condition, the condition of India. Though we are an emerging country, we are a giant in Asia, and each and every nation of the world is recognizing, but everywhere now the talks are about the Indian variant of the virus. And we are not in a position to protest about it because the government is overwhelmed. The system is overwhelmed. It is focusing more on protecting people. It is focusing more on the lives of the people, being a democratic country. China could have afforded to create an image at the cost of their people. Indian government cannot. Maybe we'll be protesting about this thing, but first we'll be controlling the disease, we'll be ensuring that more lives are not lost. You're clear with this? Now I'll come to that point, like Pradyumna has asked you, what is the difference between nation and state? And it is important with respect to international relations as well. So I'll be giving maybe 2-3 minutes to ensure that you understand this thing. Nation is a feeling. Nation do not necessarily have boundaries. Okay? When you talk about nation, it's basically associated with the feeling. Okay? We feel like a country. Let's say, take an example of Sri Lanka. It is a state. What are the characteristics of a state? The characteristic of a state is like what? It has a defined boundary. Yeah, right point, Anis. A state has its own sovereignty. It has boundaries. Fixed होंगी. आपको पता होगा कि यहां से यहां तक ही है. दिस इज श्रीलंका, तो ये इतना ही है. ओके, नाउ लेट्स से श्रीलंका को अगर हम देखते हैं, अब इसमें नेशंस कितने हैं? नेशन इज मोर अबाउट बीइंग एसोसिएटेड विथ फीलिंग ऑफ बीइंग समवेयर. ठीक है, दिस इज योर तमिल नेशन इन श्रीलंका. तमिल नेशन. ओके, दिस एरिया, this is some sort of Islamic nation. It is more about the feeling, the connectivity, and rest of the part, this is Sinhala nation. So in a state there can be, Krishna, you need to check your internet connection. I think rest of the people are getting my voice. So Sinhalese nation, right? Kunal, ठीक है, Sinhalese nation, you can call it like that. So there are 3 nations in a single state. For example, if you take example of India, we have also many nations. Tamil people are very much like they want their areas intact, their culture intact. There is Tamil nation, Telugu nation. We have Naga nation, right? But as a country, as a state, we are one. This is India. ठीक है? India is a nation state. Whole of India believes in the nation that is India. होल ऑफ स्टेट. इसीलिए हम नेशन स्टेट कहते हैं इसे, कि फीलिंग भी है इंडिया होने की, बिकॉज इट हैज एग्जिस्टेड सिंस 1000 ऑफ ईयर्स. भारत का जो कॉन्सेप्ट है, द कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ भारत और इंडिया, इंडिया इज अ न्यू नेम, बट द फीलिंग विद भारत, द कंट्री with the natural boundaries, it were always there, for existing for last 1000 and 1000 of years. It was always there. अभी clear है सबको? Preeti, your comment is visible, of course. Yeah, your comment is visible. I hope all of you are clear with this thing. Polity में आपने थोड़ा देखा होगा. Now it must be clear to you. ठीक है? Now we'll look at the themes in the evolution of India's international relations. ठीक है? क्लियर है? वेरी गुड. तो जब भी आप क्या है कि whenever you will be writing the answer, make sure कि आप you identify the words. जब हम क्या है कि will be writing from the perspective of the government, right? किसी पॉलिसी की बात कर रहे हैं, तो you need to make sure that you are using the term state. And many a times you'll be writing your answer from the perspective of this thing, people, or maybe some policy decision that most of the population of the country wants. तो उसमें क्या है कि you'll be using the term nation. ठीक है? And now we'll look at the themes. हर country का हमें क्या है कि लाइक आई एक्सप्लेन्ड इनिशियली ओनली कि हर कंट्री को क्या करना होता है, दे हैव सम इंटरनेशनल रिलेशंस बेस्ड ऑन व्हाट, फॉरेन पॉलिसी. तो इंटरनेशनल रिलेशन क्या है, फॉरेन पॉलिसी क्या है. इंटरनेशनल रिलेशनशिप इज द रिलेशनशिप दैट एग्जिस्ट्स बिटवीन द कंट्रीज एंड द पॉलिसी इज द document or the framework based on which a country tries to establish the relationship. ठीक है. So every country's foreign policy and international relationships is based on certain themes, based on certain experiences, based on their cultural ethos. So if we talk about India, okay, Shivam, what you didn't understand? You can put your questions. So we have live session, right? If you're finding it difficult to understand or comprehend some of the things, I'll be more than willing to explain more. So there are 5 aspects of traditional values that belong to the values that Indian ethos always had. ठीक है? But the policies are made for the purpose of people how to differentiate. I'll answer this question, don't be worried. We'll be looking at the aspects. Some of the aspects जब वो आएंगे, when it will appear in our discussion, I'll make sure कि I tell you कि where to use the word state and where to use the word nation. Don't be worried. Don't be in haste. हर चीज हम cover करेंगे. Just have some patience. Okay? Now the values, the traditional values which has actually governed India's relationship, India's foreign policy. तो इसमें सबसे पहली चीज जो है, it is the middle way. This is middle way. ठीक है. We as a nation, if we look at our history, if we look at our scriptures, we as a nation never believed in the extremes. We always chose the middle path. We were never ever concerned with the extremities. Mostly, we are talking about most part, not all. Some aberrations definitely are there in the history of the world, history of India, history of even a small place. But those aberrations don't define us. What defines is the Indian traditional value that has been in existence, the middle way. Like in the middle way, Anis, like I had suggested earlier only, it may take 50 to 55 hours to complete everything. Whatever is important from the perspective of GS, general studies. It will take around that time. So I was talking about the middle way. So middle way is, we have to look at some of the examples that will make things easier for us. For example, dharma. We call it dharma. We have certain duties, certain social duties, moral duties, spiritual and rituals. We have certain duties. But if you look at the Indian people, they do not were ever into the extremes. If some of the times they missed few of the things for different thing, they will not be cursed. ऐसा नहीं है कि आपने एक चीज नहीं की तो आज के बाद से खत्म हो गया, कुछ नहीं होगा. तो ये शुरू से ही, इफ यू सनातन धर्म की जो बात करते हैं, बीइंग इन इंडिया वी टॉक अबाउट सम ऑफ द सनातन धर्म्स, सम ऑफ द पीपल हु आर लाइक एनिमिस्ट, हु वर्शिप द फोर्सेस ऑफ नेचर, they never looked at anything at their extremes, though it was part of their everyday lives. But it was not like if some of the days they have missed few of the things, they will be punished. It were not like that, right? If we talk about the capital accumulation, all the scriptures, ancient scriptures, even the modern books in India, they definitely talk about accumulation of the wealth for the times when you'll be needing it. But they also talk about distributing that thing among the poor who are needy. So it was never about doing this thing only. The other thing is like kama, the sensual pleasure. We have many examples in the country. We have books that describe this thing. We have architectures that has given weightage to sensual pleasure. But at the same time, we had saints from the very extreme. And a normal man who is living with the family was always told to balance between these two things. It was never about extremity. आज भी वो आप देख सकते हैं, every family has all these aspects, right? यहाँ क्या है? मोक्ष, the liberation. The liberation, like in our, from ancient times, people talk about liberation, doing good things to achieve liberation when they leave this holy being, right? But people, most of the people were engrossed in their regular family activities. There were few people who will go to the extreme, but most of the people were focused more on the things which they see, which is of their family's concern, right? So we always had a history of middle path. So when we look at some of the things in our international relations, we always maintained this middle path. The best example being the era when there was Cold War. We'll be coming to explanation of all these things, but there was a time when US and Russia were fighting. And they wanted each and every country to declare that they should tell with which country they are standing, right? But non-aligned movement, right, Kunal? Now, this is the period when India chose the middle path, and they told that they'll not be with any of those. Anyone who is right, India will stand by them. But if somebody is going wrong, the same nation will not find support from India. And we had many times proved this as well. We'll be discussing this thing, how we did that. Now, the second thing is tolerance. India is always a tolerant country. Many of you may argue that because of this thing only we have lost many a times. We were hurt many a times because of this thing. But this has actually helped us to make a standing in the world arena. India is a country which is recognized for its soft power. And the reason being that we were always tolerant. India is a tolerant country. When there was a time, right, when this whole of India there were no other religions in this country, right? With the advent of Christianity, when it came into existence, the first Christians came to India in 47 AD, and they were welcomed. It were not like Indian people said that you belong to some other religion, so you cannot come. They came to India, they talked about their religion, they were allowed to spread the religion of their choice. And we were tolerant. Like the same thing, Jews came to Kerala in 70 AD and they were also welcomed. Parsis came in 7th century AD and they still are staying with the people with other religions in India. So India has a ethos of tolerance towards each and every new thing which did not try to hamper the stability of our country. So historically, we are a tolerant country. So we have tolerance towards some of the misgivings of the country as well. When Pakistan tried to capture some part of Jammu and Kashmir again in 1965, we defeated them, but we did not try to capture their area. In 1971, India went up to Lahore, captured the part, but still being a tolerant country, we do not want to harm others. So we gave their land back. Okay. Now, India is also a country which has always remained aware about the realist philosophies and idealist philosophies. Some of you who are having PSIR as their optional, you need to understand this thing properly because this thing will be used again and again in your optionals. So what is realist philosophy? Realist philosophy is a philosophy which believes in the things which are real, which is the normal course as per most of the people. Like if there is attack on your country, you need to defend it with might. There has to be a war to make sure that you save your country. This is being real. If somebody is trying to encroach on your land, it is the dharma. It is the dharma of a country to make sure that they defend themselves, their people, their resources, and they stay intact at the times of adversities. But the idealist philosophy, like in Buddhism and Jainism, they talk about ahimsa. They don't want to harm the people, even those people who are actually harming us. Okay? So we had culture of this. In Arthashastra and Panchatantra, we had talks about realist philosophy. We tit for tat like situation. And idealist philosophy, definitely, even Gandhiji was biggest proponent of this idealist philosophy. They believed in the truth. They believed that with truth you can win against any of the adversaries. Okay? So this is also reflected in our foreign policy, in our international relations. Though we know that Pakistan is coming to us and they are talking some good things, it will backfire. But still we try to believe in them. We try to make sure that let's make it possible. Let's try to create a relationship which can help the people of both the nations. 99% of the times, we are aware it won't happen, but we take chances 1%. Because of what? This idealist philosophy that has existed in our country for such a long period of time. Now, the next value is absence of imperialist tradition. Probably after reading this thing, कि हम लोग imperialist नहीं थे, अगर हम ऐसा कहते हैं, that we were never imperialist country. Many of you probably will not believe in this thing, because in history you have read that everybody was fighting for grabbing some land, grabbing some empire. So, but if we look at the overall history of this Bharat, then you'll see that most of the rulers who were ruling majority part of the country, they never tried to go beyond Hindu Kush. The scriptures always talk about protecting the land area, the Bharat, which is up to Hindu Kush mountains. So the overall idea of nation since ancient times was limited to this land area. Though many of the kings fought amongst themselves to capture this land, but they never had a policy of imperialism beyond this. The thing which we call imperialism came to India with the advent of British. Yeah, in Mahabharata also they fought to protect their own land from the aggressors who were not just, right? So all the stories, all the mythology, all the historical books tell us that India never had a tradition of capturing someone else's land, someone else's resources. And it is very much evident since we got our independence. Jawaharlal Nehru, our first Prime Minister, made sure that he pitched for the nations who are under imperialism. The first thing that he did after getting independence was to appeal to the world to make each and every nation free. Okay? So we had absence of imperialism. So like I was talking about this thing only, after independence in 1949, there was a conference in Delhi where India talked about securing independence to Indonesia from the Dutch. We supported Namibia. We helped Bangladesh to emerge as an independent state. Likewise, we helped Algeria and Tunisia. And like I had already suggested, we returned the land, the territories captured from Pakistan in 1972. Preeti, no, you won't be required. I think this, after looking at this, you must be very clear that these things are going to be easy to read, right? You don't need to make Mughals, Deepak. So I said about aberrations as well. Some of them, not all the Mughals tried to capture the Central Asia. They had plans, but they never executed. They could not reach that place even, right? So there was no such incident. Some of the people who are ruling may have some idea. They can think of it, but they never actually pursued that thing, right? Now, the other thing is exhibiting positive ideas through negative terms. Here, when we talk about negative terms, it is not negative in toto, not in essence. Negative means Indians tend to use a term which do not. We are talking about people who ruled India. If you consider Mughals as intruders, that is a wrong thing. Then most part of the history, if you look at, there were people who came to India who plundered and went back. Mughals stayed here. They made this country their own country and then they ruled. So it is not, they ruled for a very long period of time. Maybe Babur had some intentions to plunder. But after, if we look at Akbar, of course, he was as Indian as I am or you are. Okay? Exhibiting positive ideas through negative terms. If we talk about this thing, so positive is peace. It will make things easier for you to understand. Peace, but we talk about non-violence. We talk about times when there is no violence. Okay, so we talk about non-violence, ahimsa. So we are not talking about hinsa, we are talking about ahimsa. So we use the words which are neutral in essence, but most of the countries use such words which do not give essence that is different from what they are written. Okay, so this, we do not believe in defeat. We don't want to defeat people. Historically, we don't wanted to use such terms. In fact, we talked about parajay, not jay, parajay. Somebody else won. Nobody was defeated. Somebody else won, right? So use of such words has also given a direction to the policy, the foreign policy, the international relation, the documents that we sign with other people definitely have impact of such usage, right? Like non-alignment in itself was a negative term. People wanted to be aligned with some or the other, but non-alignment is itself inspired from the words like these only, okay? So, I think you have understood this thing. Now we'll move further to the foreign policy. This is, like I had said, I had differentiated between international relation and foreign policy. Foreign policy is a document which defines the external relations of a country. ठीक है? तो if we talk about the objectives, what are basically the objectives of Indian foreign policy, or for that matter anybody's foreign policy, वो क्या हो सकती हैं? That even you can guess कि वो क्या क्या हो सकता है, क्या चाहती है कोई भी country. Why do they establish relationship with other countries? क्यों करते हैं हम? Right? If we want to have a relationship with USA today, हम क्यों करना चाहते हैं? Because this is a mighty country. ठीक है? उसका, it has a say in each and everything wherever it is happening. If we are friends with USA, China will think twice before attacking India. Right? Yeah, Anish Panch. Mutual profit, Bharti, very good. Mutual profit. We look towards economics as well. We look towards economy as well. So, if we look at some of the objectives of any country, for that matter, The first thing is they want to make sure that they have their political independence. They are independent countries, political independence, because most of the countries of today's world were ruled by some other state in the history. Non-interference is right, non-interference. We want to promote, India specifically has a philosophy of promoting world peace as well. This is basic tenet of our foreign policy. Yeah, political support for many of the matters, Yati. We want to avoid wars when we are in communication, when we have a policy of engaging with some of the country, be it a nation which is close to us or it is far from us. Then based on that policy document, we have something to talk about. For example, at this for few months, India was in a position to negotiate with China because we had a policy document made in 1991 about the dealings of territory, the boundary dispute. So based on that, even when many of our soldiers lost their life during border dispute, it did not escalate into full-fledged war. Yeah, for safety purpose, diplomatic supremacy, of course. Now, economic development, somebody has said, we want to avoid dangerous wars. India do not want any war. The world has already seen. Ades, everything is important which is written here. You'll have to read at least these things. This is very small write-up, as good as notes. If I'll dictate these things, you'll simply waste your time. It is more like it is notes. You just have to get a printout of these and you can read directly. It won't take much time. After understanding this, when I'll send this, it will make things easier for you. If you want me to give more detailed notes, then I can go for this thing. But I'm focusing more on explaining and giving a small write-up so that you can focus more on understanding and less on writing. If you want, you can write these things at home, but this will be an utter waste of your time. Don't do that. What is the difference between international relations and international politics? International relation, like I said, is established between the nation, and politics is always about what? It is always issue based. Politics is never issue-less. Relations doesn't have to be based on a specific issue. It can be based on many of the issues. Politics shall happen always on a singular point, on a singular discourse, right? This is the basic difference. You clear, Anis? Okay, so let's move ahead. Now we'll look at what are the determinants of India's foreign policy. मतलब what are the things? ऐसी क्या क्या चीजें हैं जिसपे क्या है कि हमारी foreign policy बना है? In a way, international politics, yeah, it is subset of international relations. If there are relations, so there is politics. Isolated nations won't have any kind of politics between them, right? They won't get involved. In a way, you can say that. ठीक है? Now we are talking about the determinants of India's foreign policy. So the first thing that you are looking at is geographical factor. So let me explain few of the things. This write-up talks about how topography of land, fertility, climate, or natural resources define this relationship. I'll take an example and ensure that you understand how things work when it comes to foreign policy or international relations based on geographical factor. Let's take example of Himalayas. Okay, this is a geographical feature. If you understand this aspect, you'll be in a position to write many of the answers really well, right? This is practical thing that I'm telling you. So you need to understand this. So this is Himalayas. What Himalayas has done as a physical feature, it didn't allow India and China, the kind of exchange of people, culture, resources, which could have been possible if it was not there, right? So what Himalayas did, it created Indic culture. Here, this is our India, and it created a different Chinese culture here, right? As the intermixing, okay, as the intermixing was not really easy, these two cultures are completely different. But when the culture is different, there is always suspicion. When the culture is different, let's say somebody is a vegetarian, okay, and he is going to someone who is non-vegetarian, right? So if you have seen, culturally people are like what? They'll be afraid to eat in those houses, or maybe some of the restaurants where non-veg is being served, because they are always suspicious whether they will be using clean utensils or not, whether they will be mixing it or not. So different culture, different habits often create suspicion. A geographical feature has created suspicion between these countries based on the culture, right? Based on the culture, there was suspicion. So naturally, the Chinese and Indians cannot mingle the way Bangladeshis and Indians can. There is always a sense of doubt because they are completely different culturally. Now, because of the geographical factors only, the physical feature, the race is also different. Here we have different races that creates more of a suspicion. By looking at some individual, we think that he is different, right? You can see these differences in India as well. Somebody living in North India is different from South India, from Northeast maybe, from some of the hilly states, and you must have seen, we have perceptions about them. If you have not visited those places, you always have a thinking that actually doesn't necessarily is true. All people are like us, but we have some inhibitions based on geographical factors of culture, physiography, language, races, right? Yeah, Kunal, races is biological. Yeah. So you are clear with this geographical factor, how it can have an impact? But this is one side of the story. The geographical factor has also helped to bring some similarities. Like some part of China, the Tibetan people are fond of India. They are very, very fond of India, right? Why? Because here we definitely have some passes as well. In Ladakh, in Arunachal Pradesh, there were some places where the exchange of ideas, resources, values, thinking was continuous. And so Buddhism is spread to these areas. So definitely some part of China, without doubt, has a very cordial relationship with India, though the government doesn't want that. But if you'll ask a person who belongs to Tibet, he'll always talk good about India. So these things, geography definitely determines the foreign policy, the international relations, right? You clear with this? Now we'll be looking at some other aspects. History and tradition. The second point which is important is your history and tradition. India, like I had already said, believed in Vasudeva Kutumbakam, that the world is one. So our policy since the beginning traditionally we always welcomed everyone. So whenever India tried to reach out to other countries, to some of the nations who had initially no connect with the country, they also welcomed us with open hands. They never ever had inhibitions about the intentions of India. Okay, so the values that we have inherited from our past has actually helped us become the soft power. Okay, but this history of imperialism has also impacted our relationship with some of our neighbors and some of the countries which had different traditions. We, as a colony, British colony, adapted to democracy, right? We believed in democracy because democratic form of government was popular in Europe. It was popular in USA. So we adapted that form of governance. But some of the communist countries like China, they were again having suspicions based on the history of some of the democracies, right? Behavior of some of the imperialist countries. Plus, being a colony, India actually did not had any say in the foreign policies at that point in time. But this British forced us to get into some of the agreements which has egged some of our neighbors like China, like the 1914 pact between India and China. We'll be looking in detail about it, has actually created the boundary dispute today, right? It has its seeds in 1914. There China was not independent country, India was not independent country, but what British did, they signed an agreement which we call as Simla Agreement. In that agreement, what they mentioned, that McMahon Line, at that point in time, we did not call it as McMahon Line, but we were talking about the region which is Tibet. They said that Tibet is, yeah, Kunal, of course. So what they did was they considered the Tibet as an autonomous region, but the rulers of the time who were in China never wanted that, and India paid the price of a decision made by British when we were a colony. Okay, we'll look into details of that, but these examples of course ensure that the relationship with our neighbors. For example, Myanmar, India was actively involved initially in its freedom. So even though Myanmar is cut off from most part of the world, but India do have a good relationship with Myanmar. For example, Nepal also, we had most of the time we had cordial relations because of the imperialist history only, right? We'll look into details when we'll be dealing with these relationships. The third condition is economic condition, right? So foreign policy, non-alignment, for example, like not going with any of the countries, being neutral, right? Why India wanted to be neutral and why still we want to be neutral? Because there are many considerations which are related to economy. We as a developing country, or at that time, we as a nascent independent country did not had resources to go for another war, right? If we could have sided with USA, most probably Russia could have tried to harm us. If we could have sided with Russia, USA in all probabilities could have done some harm to India, right? Being non-aligned at stages at some point in time, these countries did try to manipulate us. So if India could have taken some of the sides, they could have never ever helped us. But as a nascent independent nation, we wanted some kind of help from these rich nations, right? Because we wanted some transfer of fund, because we were not in a position to set up industries or make big urban cities or go for some of the technology that was costly. We wanted dams, we wanted energy security. We wanted finished goods as well. We had raw material, but no industrial setup, right? We wanted our personals to be trained. So even though India was a colony of British, we chose not to deteriorate our relationship with our tormentor, that is British, right? We had friendly relation with that as well, and we got our commodities sold in those markets. We wanted them. So we were not very emotional about this foreign policy, our relations with other countries. We were always rational, right? We'll be looking at some of these aspects in detail while dealing with the particular nations. Now, the other thing which is really important is nature of leadership. Nature of leadership in the country. The nature of leadership often dictates the relationship with other countries. For example, the best example, I'm not taking example of India, I'll be talking about that. But let's say USA. Now, 6 months back, 7 months back, they looked very, very strong under Trump, right? President Trump made sure that he was bullying China, North Korea, each and every state, even Iran. Whoever were trying to stand in front of USA, he decimated them. But since Biden has been chosen as the president of America, you can of course see that North Korea is resurgent, Iran is resurgent, even China is not taking USA seriously. So the nature of leadership always defines a country's relationship with other countries. Okay? So if we talk about the relationship, the major relationship that developed during the initial stages, if we talk about Jawaharlal Nehru, he had a very strong image. He was a international leader in true sense. Though he belonged to a country which was a colony of the British, his stature in world politics was really, really big. So India benefited from them. What he always talked about collective good. So there was always a positive perception about India. But Pakistan, it got the independence at the same time, but till date it did not have a image of its own. And if there is some image, it is bad, right? So Jawaharlal Nehru made sure that whoever we are approaching, we are going with a message of peace, disarmament, and here comes Panchsheel. We'll have a look at Panchsheel when we'll be talking about how Jawaharlal Nehru shaped our foreign policy. Okay, we'll go into details of that. But under Jawaharlal Nehru, the problem, collective good means good of all. The good should not only accrue to some individual or single nation. It should be for everyone. If you talk about societies, it should get to every individual. If you talk about nations, it should reach to the world. Clear? So, but under Jawaharlal Nehru, India was never seen as a strong nation. We were always perceived as a weak nation because many a times we did not do anything when there was problem around the world. When Pakistan took some of the territory of Jammu and Kashmir, we went to United Nations. When there was problem of SAARC Creek with Pakistan, we chose not to do anything. When there was problem of nuclear blast by China, India kept mum. So we were always considered as a weak nation. That was a problem during that time. That remained during Lal Bahadur Shastri as well. But with the advent of Indira Gandhi into the political scenario of India, things changed. India was being perceived as a strong nation. India was perceived as EU theory based on collective. Anis, you are going beyond what is required. Collective good doesn't have to be related to some theory. Collective good is a small, simple word that has a meaning that everybody should get benefits. Okay. So let's come back to this thing. If it will be important, I'll definitely discuss those things. Don't be worried. I'll be covering everything. Now, Indira Gandhi, she was a realist. She didn't believe in idealism. Like Nehruji was at somewhat idealist. He believed that if we do good to people, if we try not to harm others, they'll not harm us. But Indira Gandhi was always ready for any of the events, whatever was happening around India. She made sure that if Pakistan can hurt us again and again, she liberated Bangladesh. She was very wise. She went to many of the conferences before entering into the war with Pakistan, and she made sure that Bangladesh is liberated and Pakistan learnt its lesson. Then it didn't try ever till Kargil, right? Yeah, Saurabh. She was called by many good names which symbolizes power. ठीक है? She also did not believe, she was not very adamant about being non-aligned. She openly chose Russia, former USSR, only because she was very certain that this is the country which can help some of the non-aligned nations. She never believed in USA. But it was not like she did not support USA when it was required. But she was very choosy in her actions based on the practical things, not based on some concept of idealism, right? When we talk about, and thereafter people were not so strong, but still the legacy of Indira Gandhi was taken forward by Rajiv Gandhi, thereafter by the governments. But when Atal Bihari Vajpayee came, he again changed the scenario. He was like, there was a perception that there can only be enmity between India and Pakistan. But with his dialogues, he somehow managed to create a foreign policy that instilled some kind of confidence between our foreign nations. Most of the nations believed that India doesn't have to be a big brother. It can be a good neighbor, right? So the perception changed. So what he did, he engaged with Pakistan, and he also engaged with United States in a different way. Though he did nuclear blast and USA sanctioned India, but he made sure with different channels that USA was ready to have dialogue, and our relations with USA started improving during his tenure only. Now Dr. Manmohan Singh, he took this relationship, the foreign, yeah, Kunal will be talking about Gujarat Doctrine and all. When we'll come in details, we'll talk about each and every tenure in detail, don't worry. And Dr. Manmohan Singh, he went with nuclear deals. He consolidated the relationship with the USA, and the moment you do this thing, it was a clear signal to Soviet Union, to China as well, that we are again non-aligned. We'll be taking decisions based on certain merits that can help India and the world, right? So we had this relationship consolidation, and he was the one who actually helped India to project itself as market to the world. Because of his policies only, many of the giants of the multinational companies started looking forward to India as a destination, as a market. And he put forward India as a economically developed nation, economically suitable nation. So the foreign relationship of India was inclined more towards economic benefits with each and every country. We improved our relations with China as well. We went into some of the bilateral relations which benefited both the nations. Now, if we talk about Narendra Modi, he has a equally global leadership, if not like Nehruji, definitely almost at par with any other nation that we have, nation has seen, any other leader that nation has seen. And he has a very different policy. He actually helped India emerge as a nation which is grounded and which believes in itself. He has a policy of tit for tat. If you try to harm us, we'll harm you. If you are friendly with us, we'll stay friendly with you. He is the man who actually tried to make this nation Atmanirbhar. At least the idea of Atmanirbhar is being talked about today. He wants India to be seen as a manufacturing hub. And in our foreign policy, Indian government is making sure that whenever we are having a dialogue with any of the countries of the world, we ensure that we put forward this thing with each and every nation of the world. This is why US seeks India to tackle China in Indo-Pacific. No, yeah, it is a bit different. Maybe while reading your PSIR, you'll know that the foreign policy of USA is based on domino theory, or maybe you must, if you have not heard of fondolization, you'll know about that. And a theory based on a thinker, Spikeman, who said that if all the countries of the world who are even far away from USA get together with Russia, then they can harm. So each and every country which can stand up against USA, they make sure that they are fighting amongst themselves. North Korea, South Korea, Israel, Palestine, India, China, Pakistan, and all of that. But this is not relevant with PSIR, with GS, so don't be worried. Don't be worried about this thing. You'll learn this thing in PSIR. And now, so China is dominating in Indo-Pacific. It is trying. It is trying hard. And of course, it is the biggest giant of this region, so definitely it will do that. But it cannot. Right? It is trying to dominate. Now, the other thing which impacts the foreign relationship is domestic dynamics. Whatever happens here dictates the relationship. Let's say we want to do a deal with USA. Then something will be said by our opposition leaders. The civil society will come with some of the arguments. NGOs will talk about something, some good things, some bad things. So the government is always under scrutiny. The government of the day cannot take any decision in haste. It cannot be like, we want this thing, so we'll be doing this. They cannot do that. They always have to listen to what the public has to say. It is very, very required from the perspective of the government to ensure that they take into confidence the population before doing a deal with any of the countries. Right? So you're clear with this thing? So domestic, if we talk about these domestic influences, it can be nature of the governing system as well. Let's say the bureaucratic setup is such that some of the things cannot happen. For example, we have definitely many of the treaties with many intergovernmental bodies, many of the countries about shipping laws. But in some of the countries, if you go, there will be only 3 paperwork and they'll get their work done. But in India, 2 years back, as many as 56 papers were to be signed. Even if the government of the day decides that they want to make a system which is equivalent and efficient like some other country where only 3 papers has to be signed, the governing system has to change. If the bureaucratic setup says that we cannot change this thing because of this and that, the political leadership cannot do that. So definitely such things also impact the relationship. domestic. That is I am explaining. Pradyum, we are explaining that only. Domestic things, whatever is the nature of governing system. I gave the example of bureaucratic setup, right? Nature of the governance, the policies of the political parties. This also influences, this is domestic event, the policy. Some BJP has a policy for itself. Your Congress has a policy. Some other political parties have a policy. So, though BJP wanted to resolve the Tista issue with Bangladesh. Tista is a river. You must have read geography and you must have seen this river. So, Tista river controversy is there with Bangladesh. Though BJP or the Indian government of the day wanted to resolve that issue, but the Trinamool Congress, Mamata Banerjee had some issues with that policy decision, and ultimately the government could not take any final decision on that. So the local politics is also influencing our relationship with our neighbors, right? International relationship is also being influenced by some of the policies of the political parties. The pressure groups also create a great deal of perception, right? For example, if you take example of Australia, Adani was given what? Coal field there. But their peer groups and pressure groups started protesting there. Even many of the protesters reached the cricket grounds when Indian players went there to play. So some of the policies had to be adjusted because of that as well. Similarly, when India was trying to sign a nuclear deal, there were many opposition from many fields, and we wanted to have nuclear reactor from many of the countries, but we could not get it from USA because the public pressure was there, public perception was there that their reactors are risky. So whatever is happening in our country, of course, influences the international relationships. Okay? So, of course, like we talked about leadership. Leadership is always domestic. Yeah, Kunal, the Sri Lanka port city development against China is also a very good example. The Hambantota port, it is also a very good example. Now, the other influence is the international trends. The international trends also force the nation to take a stand on the policy or the relationships with other nations. For example, we have used the term non-aligned movement, NAM. The international event of Cold War, the enmity between USA and USSR forced India to go for non-aligned policy, non-aligned relationship with most nations of the world, right? So the international trend and the movement, India remained non-aligned, but with the collapse of USSR, what happened? With the collapse of USSR, there was a shift in foreign policy. A small event that happened in some other country, based on the international trends, people knew that now there only exists one superpower, that is USA. You cannot deny it. You have to make sure that you are in good terms with USA, right? You have to have a good relationship with USA. So India also was influenced. India was also influenced, and India started showing lack of enthusiasm towards the non-aligned movement. We were not inclined to look non-aligned. We wanted to be close to USA. After 1991, if you look at the policies, like we'll be discussing, India started coming close to USA. Now, after the collapse of USSR, India established complete diplomatic relationship with Israel. Before that, what India was doing, sometimes we were like ready to listen to Palestine. Some of the times we are like ready to listen to Israel. But after the collapse of USSR, India knew that Israel is an important country. It is an important ally of USA. If we are going along with USA, we need to make sure that we are into good terms with Israel as well. India started focusing more on Southeast Asia and South Asia. We became more aware that if we look in close terms with our neighbors, then we'll be better placed in world arena as well. We'll be in a better position to negotiate things, right? And after the collapse of USSR, it was clear divided world, developed nations, developing nations. So India got an opportunity to free itself from the shackles of non-aligned movement, and it started making a grouping of the developing nations, and it started representing itself into the various forums, right? बहुत सारी जगह पे क्या है, आपने आज भी देखा होगा, वी हैव WTO नेगोशिएशन, तो इंडिया क्या है, या अनिश, right, India still is with Palestine when it comes to humanitarian works. Policy wise, still you'll see that some of the times we seem like we are completely with Israel, some of the times we seem like we are with Palestine. So on humanitarian grounds, India always stands with the suppressed or oppressed. ठीक है? Now climate change and global warming, we are vocal about it because we are seeing the changes, right? अभी अभी आपने देखा होगा हिमाचल प्रदेश में क्या है, बर्फबारी हुई, उत्तराखंड में हो गई. We have snowfall in Uttarakhand and Himachal in the month of April. So this is a evidence that India is reeling under climate change. अभी क्या है कि एप्पल की खेती सारी बर्बाद हो गई थी. So global warming and climate change, India is a global leader. Previously, what the developed countries used to make a policy, और बता देते थे कि नहीं अभी डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज आपको ये करना होगा. डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज और लीस्ट डेवलप्ड कंट्रीज वर फोर्स्ड, दे वर forced to follow some of the policies made by the West. But now the developing countries like India have started asserting themselves that most of the pollution, most of the climate change has been there because of the industrial revolution brought by the West. So they have to take responsibility about this thing, right? Now, issues of terrorism and human rights. So though most of the West, if you look at the history of terrorism, अगर आप इसके बारे में बात करेंगे, टेररिज्म के बारे में, इंटरनल सिक्योरिटी में मे बी यू हैव पढ़ा होगा या आप पढ़ने वाले होंगे आगे, तो टेररिज्म वाज नेवर एन इशू इन इंटरनेशनल डिस्कोर्स. वो कभी था ही नहीं. Nobody cared about terrorism because it was a problem of developing nations. ये यहीं पे होता था, गरीब लोग लड़ते हैं मर जाते हैं, ऐसा माना जाता था. Nobody cared. West never cared. Some of the nations like India, some of the times pitched that they should recognize terrorism. India went to USA, United Nations, and said that there is terrorism in maybe Afghanistan. We are facing the problem of insurgency. We are facing the problem of terror attacks, but they never recognized. But as soon as 9/11 happened in 2011 in USA, suddenly terrorism became the key word. It vibrated across the world. USA pitched for it, and India knew that this is the time when India can make sure that with pitching terrorism as a problem of the world, we can save ourselves from some of the neighbors who are invested in terror groups. So India pitched in for this thing, and now you see since 2011, USA, United Nations, along with many of the developed nations, have actually designated many organizations in our neighboring states as terrorist organizations. ठीक है? तो it has more to do with the opportunity. Foreign policies क्या है? इन सारी चीजों से influence होती हैं. Now we have more emphasis on the economic aspects of relationship with Europe. पहले क्या है, हम हमेशा फोकस करते थे. रशिया usually was non-aligned, in a sense, more than USA. But Europe was always with USA. But before the collapse of USSR, if India needed any of the things, if we wanted technology, if we wanted arms, we always, or any product, we always looked upon USSR to help us. But with the collapse of USSR, India knew that if we are completely dependent on a single nation, then we cannot survive for a very long period of time. So we started establishing our good diplomatic relationships with many of the states in Europe. And USA, we have already talked about that we did so, right? And we were more than eager to accommodate the American concerns. Throughout history, whenever America requested us for any of the things, then we were more than negative towards it. We always were apprehensive about it, only because we never wanted to hurt the sentiments of USSR, which was our all-weather ally. But with the collapse of USSR, we wanted someone to give us those assurances which were given to us by USSR. So we went to many other countries. So we have talked about many of the considerations. Yeah, Kunal, already we, while talking about Manmohan Singh ji, we discussed this thing, civil nuclear deal, and we'll talk more about it when we take individual leaders. Okay. So now, if we talk about what drives India's foreign policy today, we are very much aware that we talked about many things which are important, which have influenced India's foreign policy. But if we have to figure out few of the things which is driving India's foreign policy in the contemporary times, then we have these aspects. The most dominant aspects of India's foreign policy today are economic growth. So we'll be looking at the relationship with each and every country from the perspective of economic growth. Energy security. Whole of the world is reeling under energy scarcity. We always talk about some or other energy crisis. So our foreign policy is to ensure that we get our energy secured, right? We are also talking about nuclear capability and non-proliferation, because some of the rogue nations like North Korea, right? Some of the rogue nations like North Korea and Iran, they are very volatile, like Pakistan. They are very volatile nations. They can go to any extent to harm others. They do not actually believe in self-development. They don't want to develop, but they want to assert themselves in the world arena with wrong things. So India is always concerned about the nuclear capabilities of some of these rogue nations. Okay? Now the other thing is prestige security. Now what is this prestige security? Non-proliferation is basically not depositing these nuclear items in order to create arms. Some of the countries like Iran, what they were doing? They were making fissile material, nuclear fissile material, and telling the world that they want to generate energy. So India is focused on non-proliferation. People should not proliferate these items, the nuclear items, and in the shadow of energy or any other aspect, they should not make fool of other nations, because these can be used at any point in time to harm other nations, right? So you'll be reading about non-proliferation treaty as well. And in internal security, or maybe when you'll be reading science and technology, you'll read about the technologies as well. But we'll be talking about these things in detail whenever we are coming across the topics. Okay? We'll be discussing such things. Don't be worried. Now, this prestige security, each and every nation want to be observed at the global arena. The prestige of India as an IT hub It has to stay. India is concerned about this thing. So whenever we are going to any of the countries, we are having any of the agreements, then we want to make sure that we sell this thing. We tell them that we are a IT power, and we can provide you some of the things related to that. Like many of the developing nations and least developed nations, India is trying to create an infrastructure of IT for them. So this boosts India's prestige in these regions, in the world arena. Okay? So these are the points where you'll be focusing more while writing your answers. We'll be talking about some of the historical perspective, geographical, all of that. But as I have said that these 5 points are the most important focus of our foreign policy, make sure that at least you incorporate 4 of them, because nuclear capability is not valid for each and every state. There are very few states which have nuclear capability. Now, we'll look at the policies with respect to Nehruji. Okay? So, tell me first, everybody is clear with whatever we have discussed? We have discussed the basic tenets of the foreign policy. We looked up into the values that are important. So if any of you have any kind of confusion till this time, you need to ask. Then I'll start with this thing. Everything is clear? That's good. So now we'll start with India's foreign policy, the overview with respect to some of the leaders, some of the people who shaped this relationship. We'll start with our first Prime Minister, Nehruji. So before will Biden administration give nuclear theory to Iran? Biden administration is not going to be as strong as Trump administration was. And if you are looking at the history of international relations with USA, if you look at our foreign policy or US foreign policy, you must be aware that whenever Democrats are in power, whenever Democrats are in power in USA, India is usually not one of the favorites of USA. They tend to avoid India, right? And for example, if I take few names, Republicans were like George Bush. He was hated worldwide, right? Nobody liked him. But he came to India, he favored India, and a little while earlier somebody was talking about nuclear deal in 2002. It was George Bush who actually favored India at that point in time. Yeah, Tanu, if you want, you can make some of the short notes. If you want, you can jolt things. It is not like some of the stories that I tell you definitely help you. So you can note it down. Okay, I'll come to this Soviet Union question. I'll come, Amit. But first, let me explain how Democrats and Republics are playing. Because this is not very important from the perspective of international relation. But this will help you write some of the essays well. How some of the parties out there in some other country do. Like George Bush was very popular leader for Indians, but rest of the country, many of the countries didn't even invite him to their countries. Many in the West didn't do that. The reason being, he was like very cold to most of the countries, and he was more concerned about the safety of American investments. So, and he was aware that China is resurgent, so he wanted to toe it down. So it helped India. Now Obama, he got everything. He was world famous and he was a Democrat, but he was not good for India. He was never good for India. Trump, everybody hated him around the world, but he was very, very good for India. Biden, of course, you can see in such a dire need, India was such a dire need of the medical equipments, vaccinations and all. And he deliberately delayed this thing because he is a Democrat. India's relationship with Democrats was never ever good. And amid collapse of Soviet Union is like USSR. It previously consisted of many other countries as well. You must have heard in the news that it captured Crimea. So it was previously with Soviet Union only, right? So we'll be discussing about some of these events in detail, but now I will be focusing on what is more important. Will not break the chain. Democrats and republics probably I could have not discussed later, so I told you, right? You need to just keep in mind that this government, Democrat, they are not very friendly to India. Now, for understanding the foreign policy of Nehruji, we need to understand some of the things that were relevant at that point in time. The first thing was India was a colony, right? We were a colony and we got independence and we didn't had any resources. We lacked resources, we lacked technology, we lacked skilled labor, we lacked people who can be made skilled. We lacked the countries who can support us when we need them. And the reason being, there was a bipolar world. Either some of the countries were with USA or the USSR. And these were the two countries who had established themselves as the most dominant powers after World War. The results of the Second World War made sure that these two countries were in a position to shape the world politics, right? So when India became independent, it was always concerned. The Second World War was over. The Second World War was over. And of course, if the Second World War was over, it meant that India cannot take chances. Because two of the most powerful countries can capture India again. And that we didn't want it. Though Nehruji was very popular, most of the countries of the world, today we are living in multipolar world. Most of the countries recognized Pandit Nehru, but those countries which recognized India were not in a position to support India. In fact, if you talk about the Commonwealth that was created by Britain, they were even not in a position to help India because they were not anymore mighty country. British has collapsed after the Second World War. They had no say in the world politics. If there was a say, it was in name only, right? So USA and USSR were forcing the nations who has got independent recently to align with them. They were asking either you are with us or the other country, the other power. And that era is called as the era of Cold War. And it was up to the collapse of USSR. Yeah, Saksham, somewhat you are true. They deliberately demolished industrial culture and industries in India because they wanted to keep India as a colony forever. So they did that thing. So when Nehruji had a very clear conception that he didn't want it to be in line of fire between these Cold War superpowers, right? Alignment could have created problems, but non-alignment was not a solution. Even he was very much aware. So he clearly mentioned that the non-alignment was only meaning that we are not going to get entangled with any military alliances. India was particularly against any military alliances. If it was a military alliance of USA or maybe USSR, India was not interested. But rest of the events we had made clear will be supporting or negating based on merit, right? So non-alignment was not basically neutrality. It didn't mean neutrality in world politics, because neutrality has meaning only during the times of war. In peace times, there is no concept of neutrality. You cannot be neutral. During the times of peace, either you'll with someone for a cause or will be against someone for other cause. But neutrality is during war, that you do not get involved in the war. So non-alignment should not be confused with neutrality. Sazil, I had explained, Cold War is a war that is not direct, right? We are not fighting on the fronts. We are not fighting with weapons, but we are fighting by aligning some of the economic gains, political influences, having more influence in some of the international organizations like United Nations and all. Like they had veto power. You must have heard of veto power in United Nations Security Council. So Cold War is something like, if USSR is supporting a cause, let's say that USSR wanted Pakistan to get back, then United Nations, USA will say no, the territory should remain with Pakistan. Or if USA is challenging, then it will be like USSR will support India. So it is kind of, yeah, right, kind of proxy war. But it is not like even war is something like where you can create damage. It is not, Cold War era was not about damaging each other physically. It was more about deteriorating the image of the other country, hampering the image of the other country, and proving that which country is more great than the other. ठीक है? So Nehru ji was very, very clear. So he had very simply clear that I have a policy, foreign policy, and he made this clear in 1946 only, before independence. What shall be his goal about the India's foreign policy? So he had made clear in 1946 that we Indians will be pitching for end of colonialism and racism from the world. Will be pitching for independence of all the nations from power blocks, and India will be pitching for good relations with the neighbors, including China. Will be focusing more on our close neighbors instead of focusing on some other country which is distant. So he was very, very clear about this thing, and based on this idea only, in 1947, the Asian Relations Conference was staged at Delhi, and where principles of foreign policy of India were proclaimed. What were the foreign policies of India? This was proclaimed, and it was attended by 29 countries, and Nehruji told the whole world that we'll be focusing on these aspects of foreign policy as an independent nation. But after this, some of the incidents happened which made it really difficult for India and Nehruji to create a clear foreign policy. Okay? So Pakistan tried to capture Jammu and Kashmir. Everybody is aware of this thing. But Nehru, being an international citizen, in a way, he was very, very convinced that these international organizations like United Nations will help India. They are just institutions, and he went to United Nations for help in 1948. But he had not even a slightest idea that it will be seen from the perspective of Cold Wars only, right? Pakistan was very clear that it will be supporting USA. So it got aligned itself with some of the military or organizations that USA was creating, right? So it joined that. So as Pakistan was an aggressor and India went to United Nations, most of the funding to the United Nations was being done by USA, right? So what USA started doing, it started pitching for Pakistan. In all the international organizations, USA said that Pakistan is right. And at that point in time, we were under tremendous pressure. But USSR, it wanted to seem as non-aligned. So at many of the occasions, USSR supported India and we saved our face. Okay? And we'll have a break of 1 minute only. Just give me a minute. I hope I am audible. The video will start again. Okay. So Pakistan joined US promoted Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, CETO and CENTO, in 1950s. Okay. So these two organizations, as Pakistan joined it, USA made sure that India was pressurized in each and every meet, right? And not only USA, even USA convinced most of the European nations to vote against India. But in this proxy war, as Kunal had said, India prevailed because of USSR, right? But Nehruji was an optimist, like we said. He was somewhat idealist. So he believed that if we keep doing right things, then the world will recognize our efforts. He was being recognized actually, but as a nation, we were not getting that recognition. So he was convinced that if he comes out with some of the policies that can help India project as a responsible nation, then rest of the world will support it. But it did not happen. In the meanwhile, Nehruji came up with Panchsheel, the 5 principles, enumerating the international conduct. He came up with this thing in 1954. This is important. The principles of Panchsheel are important. And you have to make sure that you write Panchsheel and some of these points while attempting some of your answers. Even if not all the points, you are not using all the points, you can do this thing. In your representation, you can definitely make a flow diagram like this that will give a clear picture. You can make this thing as part of your answer. All of that you have seen. So the Panchsheel has the principles like mutual respect for each other's territorial integrity and sovereignty. It was a time when most of the countries were still not sure whether some other country will go to war. Yeah, Kunal, of course, we'll come to that as well. Non-aligned movement. So most of the countries were still juggling. Many parts of Africa was still a colony to the Western nations. So Nehruji pitched for mutual respect for territorial integrity and sovereignty. So India was a nascent country, nobody listened to that. Most of the West did not. But we got tremendous support from some of the colonial countries who did not get independence, or some of the countries which got the independence at that time, recently. We also pitched for non-interference in each other's affairs. Will not be interfering in each other's affairs, military affairs. Nehruji talked about peaceful coexistence. Let others live, let live. Right? दूसरों को तंग नहीं करेंगे. He also talked about equality and mutual benefit. The relationship between two countries should be like, it should be beneficial to both. One country should not consume the other for its own benefit like the colonies were doing, like the colonial countries were doing. And he also pitched for non-aggression, because most of the countries at that point in time were aggressive towards each other. It was an era where some of the countries which got independence recently, like Korea, it is split into North Korea, South Korea, they were fighting. Germany was fighting amongst itself. Vietnam was fighting someone. Even the communist countries were fighting with some or the other, right? So Nehruji pitched for Panchsheel, and these principles were really important at that point in time, because India was the only nation which was talking of these terms. Many of the countries, African countries, who were actually supporting for these things, did not follow this thing themselves. But until and unless Nehruji was there, thereafter Shastriji, Indira Gandhi and rest of the leaders, till 1991, more or less everybody was following these principles. Okay, so based on this thing only, Nehruji participated in Afro-Asian conference held in 1955 in Bandung, and this was the time which popularized the idea of non-alignment. There also he talked about this thing only. He talked about the principle of Panchsheel. He talked about equality, mutual benefit, peaceful existence and non-aggression. So at Bandung in 1955, this idea became more popular, right? And in this Afro-Asian conference, Nehruji extended the foreign policy. The talks of the foreign policy had certain new dimensions. He talked about some new aspects, right? In 1955, he talked about economic and cultural cooperation amongst the countries. This was the first time that he pitched in for cultural cooperation. He wanted to make sure that the two countries are not only getting connected based on some benefits which are monetary. He wanted the connection to last long. So he talked about the cultural cooperation, right? He was the first leader who came up at an international forum. Being a developing country, he pitched for human rights and self-determination. He came up with the idea of human rights to the country, developing countries, where gross human rights violation was a very regular phenomena. There also, like before, he pitched for peace and cooperation. He talked in terms of nations coming together in order to maintain peace in the world. It has to be collaborative effort amongst the nation. It shouldn't be the effort of a singular nation, right? Under Nehruji's guidance, India became the first country to begin the policy of non-alignment. Though he was supported by many of the countries, like he was Yugoslavia, Egypt, Indonesia, right? And their leaders, they supported this thing, NAM summit. Like Kunal has rightly mentioned earlier that non-aligned movement took shape, right? But while he was doing this thing, non-alignment and all, Nehruji probably missed something. He believed in the neighbor which was recognized because of his efforts only. India and Nehruji pitched for China. China was not being recognized by many. Amit, non-alignment means not supporting anyone militarily. If some country is non-alignment as per India, right? If there is any military group, then India will not be part of that. Simple. यही है बस non-alignment. ठीक है? Non-alignment का मतलब है कि हम किसी भी military group के साथ align नहीं करेंगे. अगर कोई लड़ने वाला है, will not be part of that. India will not be part of any fighting group, any military group. Pitched means supported. Pitch, ball pitch करते हैं क्रिकेट में, you pitch it. Okay? Simple English term. Okay, in 1962, when India was not looking at its neighbors' activities, and Nehruji was very much convinced that whatever the China is doing, it won't attack India, and it was a mistake. China attacked India on 10th of October 1962 and captured a ridge that is called as Thagla Ridge. Okay? Yeah, erstwhile Russia is USSR. By 10th October they did this, and China refused to recognize the McMahon line. China refused to recognize this McMahon line, and India was in trouble. They encroached, they entered India and captured a big part of India's land area. At that point in time, Russia was confused. It always wanted to seem non-aligned to each and every country of the world. So what it did not come to help India. It wanted India to resolve this issue by itself. But USA has anti-China sentiments at that point in time. Though USA was not happy, though USA did not like some of the policies of India, USA was upset that India did not join some of the military organizations that it was creating. USA supported India at that point in time because of its hatred towards China. It hated China more, right? So it helped India at that point in time. And briefly after that, we lost Nehruji. So he could not say much of the things. He was under tremendous pressure. But first 15 years, what he did was like he made sure that he remained non-aligned. Okay? He remained non-aligned. And in many of the policies, in many of the policy decisions of even USA and USSR, he supported some of the times. It is if it were for the benefit of most of the nations. He went against that many of the activities when he felt like it was not good for world as a whole, right? So, for example, in 1950, India opposed the US designed Uniting for Peace resolution. There was a resolution in United Nations that was started by US. Okay? But why India did that? Why did it oppose? Because this policy was basically directed against USSR, which was helping the non-aligned nations. Though USA has a policy, USA had declared that it will be helping some nations if they are doing this, doing that. USA always went back on its words. It was never doing things on which people can trust USA. So, in 1950, India was very clear. If some country which can stay to its word, it was Soviet Union. So, in 55, they did not support this thing. And India's refusal to join US-sponsored pacts made sure that USA declared that India is with USSR. They are not neutral. There is no meaning of non-alignment, right? Similarly, 1955, Nehruji was invited by Soviet Union, but still we know 1962 they didn't come. So this relationship continued, but after the demise of Prime Minister Nehru, India was still tagged as a weak nation, a nation without a spine, right? With his death, Lal Bahadur Shastri, our second Prime Minister, after Nehru, the one who took this thing, he has a very brief period, but he was very clear about one thing. Nehruji went to Africa, Nehruji went to Europe, Nehruji went to Americas even. He went to many of the nations, but whenever there was a need, there was no country which could have supported India always. So Lal Bahadur Shastri ji, what he did, he was very, very clear. that if we focus on our neighborhood, then definitely they'll be standing by us always. So his policy was immediate neighborhood. He wanted to improve the relationship with our neighbors, especially in South Asia. So perception of weak nation has troubled him too. The actions taken by Lal Bahadur Shastri ji also did not allow him to create image of India as a strong nation, emerging nation. So these are some of the incidents which happened during his time, which ensured that India was not seen as a strong nation. So we'll be looking at dispute in the run of Kutch with Pakistan. This was the first event. Then India exploding a nuclear bomb, but India did not react much. Okay? And India always talked about promotion of world peace and cooperation, but it was fighting. It was fighting with Pakistan, right? So a brief idea about the dispute in Run of Kutch. So Run of Kutch is a marshy land. You must be aware after reading geography, you must be very much aware that it is a marshy land. So what Pakistan claimed at that point in time, Pakistan claimed that it is a lake. This is not a marshy land, it is a lake, and according to the international law, the boundary should run in the middle of the lake. Okay? So it said that if it is a lake, then it should be from the middle, right? But India said that it is a marshy land and boundaries was well demarcated in Sindh. And Pakistan is actually intruding since 1956. So this was the claim of India. And look, the hostilities remained till 1965. During the time of Nehruji, they were doing this thing, Pakistan, and Nehruji didn't do anything except raising the issue in some international forum. In 1965, when Lal Bahadur Shastri ji was the Prime Minister of India, still he couldn't do anything. And in 1965, it went like out of proportion and hostilities broke down. But what Shastri ji did, again the same thing what Nehru ji was doing. He went for arbitration. He asked the international community to come forward and resolve the issue, which could have been easily resolved between the two nations if India have taken a stand, a firm stand. But it didn't happen. And finally, India had to part away with 900 square kilometers. Though the Indian claim was right, but as we went to international forum, and it was an era of Cold War. So USA always pissed for Pakistan because it was openly aligned with USA and UN had most of its funding. The world knew that Pakistan is wrong, but still India was asked to part with 900 square kilometers. So again, we were weak. Now, China exploded the nuclear bomb in 1964. And being a neighbor, the imminent threat was to India. We were the country which were at a threat. But India kept quiet, right? In fact, what India did, again went to some other forum. There was non-aligned conference in Cairo in 1964, in Egypt. And what they did, they requested, they pleaded China to stay non-aligned, and they sent a delegation to China. China, in fact, refused to even entertain that. They didn't receive the delegation, and India was again, as a leader of non-aligned group, it was again seen as a weak nation. And this 1965 war, it was launched under Ayub Khan. And in this war, like they captured some of the territory in Jammu and Kashmir. India opened the second front, went and went up to Lahore. India also captured that. Okay, India also captured some part of Pakistan. But here the role of USSR, which became a friend of India hereafter, was very, very, not very, you cannot admire that role. It was really, really bad. It forced India to sign a pact with Pakistan. And it also asked India to leave the territories that it has captured. India signed the Tashkent Agreement in Russia, and unfortunately, Lal Bahadur Shastri died in Tashkent in 1966, and still there is a controversy about his death, though Indian government claimed that at that point in time that everything was okay. But you must have heard that there is always a question whether he was poisoned or not. Okay, but this thing is poisoning of Lal Bahadur Shastri is not important with respect to exams point of view, but definitely you need to understand that India was literally a weak nation because we couldn't utter a word when our prime minister died in foreign land, right? So we were actually perceived as a weak nation. Then comes the era of the Iron Lady, Mrs. Indira Gandhi, right? Her policies, right? She was the lady who made sure that India is seen as a superpower. Am I audible to everyone? Give me a minute. Am I audible? Okay. So we were talking about the tenure of Mrs. Indira Gandhi. When she came, India was perceived as a powerful nation. And how she ensured that, we'll be talking about that. Okay. When Indira Gandhi came, she was like, it was not a very easy time for her. There was a perception India was a developing country, a colonial country with some of the cultural ethos that did not admire women leading the country. Even there was a lot of politics within Congress which tried to ensure that she didn't get into power. But she managed everything. She was projected as a leader, and she proved that she was an able leader, and hereafter she became the second longest serving prime minister of the country after Pandit Nehru. So some of the things that happened during her tenure which ensure that she is still revered as the most powerful leader of the country was she went ahead with Indo-Soviet Treaty of Peace and Friendship in 1971. This was a time, Suman, I have told you, Soviet Union already. It is a union of many countries. You can Google it and simply find it. This is a very simple thing. Right? Just Google it, you'll find it. You probably missed the time when we were talking about USSR and disintegration. So Soviet India-Soviet Treaty of Peace and Friendship. So this is the time when the Cold War was still on. India was a country which was talking about being non-aligned. But with this treaty, Indira Gandhi gave a clear message to USA that when it comes to being supportive of people who are not arming themselves, you are not looking forward. You are not coming forward. Instead, you are trying to corner India in each and every international forum. So she openly went with Soviet Union. In this treaty, before the Bangladesh war, what she did? She did an agreement where they mutually accepted that in case there is any military confrontation, then Russia and India, Soviet Union and India, will of course have a consultation whenever there is a military threat to any of the countries. And this has given a clear message to USA. Now, the other event was Bangladesh war fought with Pakistan in 1970 war. The very same year, what happened? There were democratic elections for the first time in Pakistan. And at that point in time, the Pakistan was divided up in two parts, East Pakistan and the West Pakistan, that is the Pakistan of today. So Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was the leader from West Pakistan, right? And Awami League, run by Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the leader of Awami League was Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. It was in East Pakistan. He was able to secure 167 seats, but Bhutto could get only 88. But as there was cultural differences between the two parts, West Pakistan always considered itself as superior to the Bengali population of East Pakistan. So they were not willing to share the power with Mujibur Rahman. What instead they did? They imposed martial law under General Tika Khan. Tika Khan was made the governor of East Pakistan, that is Bangladesh today, and Mujibur Rahman was arrested and he was taken to West Pakistan. He was imprisoned there. And when it happened, the population of East Pakistan came out in streets in support of Mujibur Rahman. But West Pakistan and Tika Khan at the helm of governance of East Pakistan, what they did? They indulged in one of the worst human rights violations in the world history. They started killing people, the supporters of Awami League. They started raping women. They arrested and massacred the leaders of Awami League. There was so much exodus from Bangladesh. Many of the people came to India. They resided in Kolkata and other parts of Bengal, and India started struggling with the refugee crisis and law and order problems. Okay? There was no PM. It was a military rule. I said that this was the first democratic election. I had mentioned this thing. You are not focusing. It was under military dictator, okay, Yahya Khan. They wanted to choose a democratic leader, so there was election. Before that, dictator was ruling Pakistan. Okay? So after looking at these things, the refugee crisis, the law and order situation, Indira Gandhi was very certain that this is the time when we can assert ourselves. We can help a nation build itself, and we can be perceived as a strong nation. But for that, she was very clear that USA is not going to support us. So she went to Western countries. They, at various forums, she said that Pakistan is indulging into gross human right violations and world has to act. But that didn't happen from the side of the world. Now the situation was like Pakistan was very clear when Indira Gandhi went outside. They were very clear that probably India is going to take some action against us in East Pakistan. So they attacked India from the Western front. But India was already prepared, and Indira Gandhi made sure that we defended both the fronts and we defeated the army of Pakistan in East Pakistan. But before that, as we have discussed, USA was very, very clear that it is not going to support India in any of the cases, right? So what it did, it sent a nuclear marine that was called Enterprise. The name of this thing was Enterprise. USA sent nuclear powered warship Enterprise to move to the Bay of Bengal, and this was the time when the pact signed between India and USSR in 1971 came into the play. Indira Gandhi talked to her counterpart in USSR, and they sent a nuclear submarine powered ship to follow the US warship. The USA has to retreat because of that, and because of that only India could defeat the Pakistan army, took the surrender of 90,000 of the soldiers from West Pakistan, and India established itself as a strong nation as well. In 1972, we had the Simla Agreement. India went with Simla Agreement. Here, Pakistan had to agree to all the terms that India has placed for them, right? So, India had terms of agreement as the differences between India and Pakistan henceforth were to be settled by peaceful means and bilateral negotiations. Both the countries said that they won't fight a war until and unless there are negotiations. Means in all and every case, they'll try to make sure that they are not going to war. Instead, negotiations has to be way forward. Then they'll also respect each other's national unity and territorial integrity, right? They were supposed to do this thing, but with Pakistan, you are very much aware, they never stick to such good things. India also made sure that Pakistan agreed not to assist or encourage acts which could affect the maintenance of peace in the region. Of course, they are not doing this thing, right? They are not doing. They are a terror factory, in fact. And India gave all the territories that they had captured from West Pakistan. And India also agreed to free all the prisoners of the war, though it took almost 1 year. In 1773 only, it was managed that all those prisoners of war, 90,000 in number, were sent back to Pakistan. But India also did one more thing. It treated all the prisoners of wars with respect and dignity. So, despite such wars, such bad relations, when India treated these prisoners of war with respect, then whole of the world was happy about this thing, and India recognized itself as the soft power that it is always said, where both the things were achieved in a single stroke by Mrs. Indira Gandhi. And the other thing which she did in her first tenure was the nuclear test of 1974, right? Ever since China conducted the nuclear test, Indian politicians who were at the helm of affairs were under tremendous pressure to conduct a nuclear test, because always we population what we want. If China is fighting, we'll fight. We do not are much concerned about the real situation of the country. The general population just want to match even USA within 2-3 years only. We always want that. But based on the things, the politicians of that time, Lal Bahadur Shastri ji, was very, very much aware that we cannot achieve this thing within a short span of time. But still under the pressure from the people, he authorized the Atomic Energy Commission to work on design of a bomb. At least if we cannot create a bomb, let's design a bomb, right? He allowed. And at that point in time, USA, the president Nixon has given a doctrine that US protection will be given to any non-nuclear nation if it was threatened by a nuclear weapon, right? But in 1964, after this nuclear explosion happened, USA sent a very clear message to Indian diplomats that if China attacks India, USA will not be helping India, right? And this was a concern for Mrs. Indira Gandhi. She was very much aware that even if China attacks India with a nuclear weapon, these rest of the West will not come, and these developing nations are not in a condition to help India in any way. So in 1974, she did the nuclear explosion. Okay. This was the time when India got sanctioned for many of the things. West came up against India and they had put many sanctions. And some of the decisions taken by Mrs. Indira Gandhi backfired and she lost the elections, right? But in first tenure, she made sure that India was perceived now as a strong contender, as a strong nation in South Asia, which cannot be towed down by the big bullies of West. Okay? So, after the elections, when Mrs. Indira Gandhi was defeated, Janta government came to power. Though they were there for a very short period of time, they had pretty good ideas about foreign policies. They talked about it. But as the government was changing every 6 months, the same party, even the Janta government had to change their prime ministers after every 6 months. So they couldn't do anything about it. But some of the things were taking shape in South Asia that would be a challenge for India. Many of the political events like emergency and all. This is India since independence. You'll read in that. That is political events. We'll not be discussing much here, right? She took some of the political decisions that backfired. People were not happy. Like this generation was not happy with the second tenure of Manmohan Singh ji. So people voted Modi to power. Some situations happened there. Politics in India since independence, whenever you will be reading that, you'll know about it. Okay? So the first non-Congress government was there, and even the population, the people were not aware how they are going to tackle these things, because nobody else except the Congress was ever in power. And at this point in time, when the election process was underway in 1979, right? The Soviet Union military had intervened in Afghanistan, a non-aligned country. And with the pact with USSR, India was very sure that Russia won't attack any of the non-aligned countries. So when there was an interview being conducted, as Janta government has lost the number, so there was election happening again. So on a radio interview, Indira Gandhi ji said that the move of Russia is not good. It should not happen. It has to remain aligned. And in the same tone, Charan Singh government declared, this Janta government declared that we'll make sure that we are not aligning with Russia. will be non-aligned. Whatever the decisions were taken by Indira Gandhi was not right. She aligned with Russia, and now the South Asia is paying the price for that. It is attacking some of the non-aligned nations. But Janta government couldn't do anything because they could not survive for a longer period of time. And their government collapsed. It was a coalition government. It did not survive. And finally, Mrs. Indira Gandhi again came to power. She was again chosen as the leader of the people, and she again tackled two things that ensured that India looked as a strong nation instead of a weak one, right? So when she took over, the Afghan crisis was underway. It was still there. When the Janta government went, USA was trying to influence Afghanistan. USSR had always positioned itself in Afghanistan. USA wanted at any cost to make sure that USSR feels the humiliation. If it has entered some other country, it will feel the humiliation, because you'll read in world history that when USA went to the war in Vietnam, it was humiliated because they were they were defeated. Protos, I cannot ensure the exact time. I'll send this PDF now only, and probably you need to inquire by calling Carrierville when they'll be uploading this file, right? I'll be sending the file after the lecture only, now. Okay? So, USA was humiliated in Vietnam. So, it has taken a stock on its reputation. So, it was very, very important for USA that Soviet is humiliated in Afghanistan, right? So, it again tried to reach out to India. It wanted Indira Gandhi to support USA in order to make sure that they can anyhow free Afghanistan from Russia. But India denied. India was in no mood to do this thing, and this denial has costed whole of South Asia its peace. In fact, whole of the world is reeling under this impact of the denial. Pakistan readily accepted, and it started training Afghan guerrillas against Russia. These USA invested $7.4 billion at that point in time. It was a lot of money. Mujahideens who fought against these. Okay? So, this event made sure that these Mujahideens emerged into a terrorist group, which has actually impacted each and everyone in the world. Afghanistan has become a factory of terrorism with the help of ISI of Pakistan. So at that point in time, Pakistan made sure that they are creating many militant groups who can defeat Russia, and Russia was humiliated. Many of the Russian soldiers were killed, and Russia had to go back. But in this crisis, Indira Gandhi didn't succumb to the pressure from USA, and she stood by her own that she'll not help any country to enter Afghanistan to disturb its peace and tranquility. Now the ethnic crisis in Sri Lanka. During her time only, there was ethnic crisis in Sri Lanka. There was conflict between Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, LTTE, the dreaded organization, whom USA had declared to be the most dreaded terrorist organization of the world, which has its own navy, military, and air force. Right? It was in Sri Lanka. So, India tried to mediate, Indira Gandhi tried to mediate this crisis, but she didn't live to see the solution for that. In fact, this Sri Lankan crisis was the reason that we lost our Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi. Even he was not in a position to solve the crisis. And finally, the Rajapaksa government, which is still in power in Sri Lanka, they were the people who defeated LTTE. So we'll be talking about all of these things. I hope Indira Gandhi's tenure you have understood. And these are 6 events. Like first tenure, we had 4 events. Her second tenure, there are 2 events. In case there is a question about the role of Indira Gandhi in international sphere, you need to make sure that you mention these 6 events. These are Mohit, Afghan crisis took place because it was a country which was not aligning with any of those, and Russia being in close proximity and a powerful country which has established itself as a superpower after Second World War, wanted to tow it down. It was just to frighten people. USA was trying it in Vietnam, Russia tried it in Afghanistan. So it was not a much bigger major event, except that you need to know that the Afghan crisis was there, where both USA and Afghanistan, Russia were involved, and India denied them access. Just do not need more information than that. Do not waste your time over such things. In fact, you have to be very clear about your goals. You need to clear the exam, right? And in exam, whatever is important from the perspective of exam, you need to focus on that only. नहीं तो 5 साल 5-year plan हो जाता है ये, पंचवर्षीय योजना. Don't do that. Focus on the things which are important. Whatever is being listed, what is being given will suffice, because for last 6 years I am teaching these things. I have seen all the questions. You'll see that whatever we'll be discussing will be in a position to tackle those questions very, very easily. And these were the things which we used to read during our times, and probably these things ensured that I gave so many interviews as well. And if I could have got someone to guide me at that point in time, probably I could have done better. Instead of these records of interviews, I could have been selected. But I never did, took help of anyone, and I was preparing on my own. So I was working at that point in time. I was a software engineer. So I never had time for coaching, and probably it costed me a service of civil services. I gave 3 interviews out of the 4 attempts. That too with very less time for preparation, but I was very, very organized. So I want all you guys to be very, very organized in your preparation. It is going to help you more. Instead of wasting 18 hours reading a book that is not relevant, try to read the things, whatever is being taught to you again and again, and have command over those matters, and try to write few answers, and you'll see yourself getting through the exams. Okay? And it's been almost 3 hours since we have been speaking. Any of you have any questions? You want to ask any question? Any confusion about any of the things that we have discussed? And my piece of advice, do take care of it. Don't ever try to run behind books. Okay? Don't run behind books. This matter only, if you can have command and good understanding, definitely you are going to face the interview in the very first attempt only. It is certain. Okay, Yati, I'm really, this was my purpose. I wanted all of you to understand whatever we discussed. And if any of you have any of the questions, you can ask, as we have less time, but last 5 minutes I would rather want to answer the questions. And don't try to, okay, Bharti, you can do that. Still, Suman, you are confused about USSR, Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, Union of सोवियत सोशलिस्ट रिपब्लिक नाम है कंट्री का ये. Yeah, Adi, bipolar क्योंकि because they both of them were too powerful and they wanted to exert influence, इसलिए bipolar. ठीक है Adi, I'll convey this message that as soon as they are receiving this thing, they'll upload it. Because I cannot do that it myself because they want me to send it to them. So I'll send it definitely so that you can have a look at it and try to understand the aspects. I have tried to make sure that you understand most of the things. Notes आपको मिल जाएंगे, don't be worried about it. And yeah, Deepak, this kind of language, probably this is not very valid at a platform like this, but trying to behave like autocratic is a thing that you need to analyze based on the things that you feel he is doing. Autocrat is a very extreme word, but yeah, we can definitely say that there were some of the lapses. Things could have been different. And at least, yeah, some of the events like elections and Kumbh could have been avoided. But going to extremes without understanding each and every aspect is not a very good idea. So be patient. You're trying to be a bureaucrat. Patience is, of course, very, very much required. Yeah, Adi, it will be sufficient. Of course, it will be sufficient. It will be more than that. Yeah, some of the things that I have discussed, maybe to create a good background of whatever we are going to discuss. So you'll be having a good understanding of each and everything. It will be all good. And from tomorrow, when we'll be entering these states, you'll have a very good idea of each and everything. You'll understand everything. And this topic is really easy. Believe me, if you understand the things, you can write after reading once only, you'll be writing good answers. Okay, Deepak, same here, and we'll take the classes tomorrow at the same time. And I'll ensure that you are, I'm sending the PDF in some time only, and do inquire and get the PDFs, okay? So we'll be ending the class now. It's 2:30. I want you to have your meal, take some rest, and read well. Go through the notes one more time, and you'll understand everything. Have a nice time then. Stay safe, all the guys. Take all precautions. The situations ain't good outside. Have a great time then, boys. And girls too. Have a nice time. I'm ending the class then. Take care. Okay, Pius, in the next class, maybe I'll share my number. After the classes, we are meeting every day at this point in time. So definitely I'll share that. Okay? Everyone take care. Stay healthy and blessed.